And you're very welcome. This is The Beautiful Truth with Fintan Dunne. Thanks for joining me, folks. Good to be here with you, and on video as well. Who'd have thunk? Wow. And good to be here also to cover an outstanding and astonishing development and a terrible defeat for the New World Order, because in the last few hours this happened here. Let's check it out. Trump confirmed Kavanaugh. Here we go. And here's some comments by Trump just before he did so.
Decency and due process. Our country, a man or a woman, must always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. And with that, I must state that you, sir, under historic scrutiny, were proven innocent. Thank you.
And there you go. With that gesture, with those words, Trump, whatever you think about him, nails the outrageous case against Kavanaugh for the feeble travesty it is, and you'll see more in what we'll cover now, which indicates that it was far from a simple, uncomplicated and true allegation from the past. Just look at some of the connections here we'll uncover. But that really, I mean, it springs out of and sprang out of the let's chuck him in the water, see if he floats. I'm not going to go into a dissection of Christine Blasey Ford. I'll leave that to Janice Fiamengo, and you'll find a link to her video all about Blasey Ford on BreakForNews.com. In the forum there we've a thread, the Kavanaugh confirmation circus thread. So I will also link to that in the comments, and to the other stories we'll cover here in the comments. But I'd rather direct your attention to something that's a bit more precise, and it's by James Howard Kunstler, and he's writing in the last few hours, and here he is talking about in Aftermath and Program and Prologue some of the background detail about the small world that the deep state is. It turns out, he writes, that the deep state is a small world. Did you know that the lawyer sitting next to Dr. Ford in the Senate hearings, one Michael Bromwich, is also an attorney for Andrew McCabe, the former FBI deputy director fired for lying to investigators, currently singing to a grand jury? What a coincidence! Out of all the lawyers in the most lawyer-infested corner of the USA, she just happened to hook up with him. Indeed, isn't it some coincidence? Kunstler goes on. He says it's also a matter of record that Ford travelled to Delaware on the 26th of July, where her best friend forever and former roommate Monica McLean lives, and then she spent the next 4 days there before sending the letter to Dianne Feinstein. So she's staying in this Delaware home of her best friend Monica McLean. Did you know that Monica McLean was a retired special FBI agent, and that she worked in a U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District in New York under Preet Bharara, who'd worked for Chuck Schumer? And there's another interesting connection from this friend, Monica McLean, best friend forever, in whose home Blasey Ford stayed just before sending the allegations in to Dianne Feinstein. The other connection is the following. McLean has a lawyer, and, writes Kunstler, let's get a bit of background on that particular lawyer. David Laufman is the guy's name, a former DOJ top lawyer who assisted former FBI counterintelligence chief Peter Strzok on both the Clinton and Russia investigations before resigning in February this year. In fact, David Laufman sat in on the notorious unsworn interview with Hillary in 2016. No. So Monica McLean's lawyer is a guy who sat in on the interview with Hillary Clinton. Those kind of connections don't come accidentally, and those kind of connections lie at the heart of everything that was going on with this charade. It has, however, disastrously backfired. And I wrote about this on BreakForNews.com. I wrote about it when Lindsey Graham made his comments, which weren't off-the-cuff comments whatsoever, but Lindsey Graham did nail it, and that was back on the 27th of September. I wrote, it's a very significant political cultural moment, almost as significant as the Hillary defeat. The witch hunt mentality has run out of steam. Time was when a woman was automatically a righteous victim, regardless of the facts or the merits of the case. A neoliberal feminist dynamic milked this for political gain for decades, including almost a definition of Hillary Clinton, right? In a calculated yet desperate attempt to stampede public opinion, they threw lurid bullshit allegations at Kavanaugh in the last 48 hours. Today, the process defeated, due process defeated the NWO lynch mob. And that's what, it was a classic hit, the layering on of allegations in the last 48 hours. Right, just before he was about to defend himself, we had additional allegations, and then in the last 24 hours, a classic move, absolutely stark, rape party allegations, which were designed to be so lurid that you didn't even want to talk about Kavanaugh, that he was so contaminated now, even by allegation. Those allegations didn't have to stand up longer than 48 hours. They just had to colour the last 24 hours leading into that process. So it was a very calculated and deliberate move. But you've seen now some of the connections in Kunstler's article there, and how they track back. Now, there is, however, one other aspect of all this, and that's the background of Brett Kavanaugh. And perhaps you should be concerned about other things about Brett Kavanaugh besides what he, on the basis of evidence, is innocent of as charged. Perhaps you should be looking as this article on Yahoo, and I'll link to that as well, My Sinister Battle with Brett Kavanaugh Over the Truth. Who's this by? It's by Ambrose Evans Pritchard. Now, he's a rather wonky financial writer who writes for the Telegraph in the UK. He was, however, a Washington correspondent, and he was in Washington around the time that Kavanaugh was last involved in momentous events, because you see, Kavanaugh was on the team of lawyers who were operating with Ken Starr in the famous investigations into the Clintons conducted by Ken Starr. He was on the team, one of the lawyers backing up Ken Starr. And this article by Ambrose Evans Pritchard, there again is Kavanaugh shaking hands with Clinton. And as he said in his own defence during his statement, Kavanaugh has moved in the highest circles. And here he is around the time that he was assisting Ken Starr. Something happened during the course of that. It was the death of Vince Foster. I don't have to remind any of you who are innate conspiracy theorists who Vince Foster is, but for those of you who aren't up to speed, there's my boy again with George Bush and the Queen, and there he is meeting the Pope with George Bush in the background. So he moved in those circles, but there was testimony which came out. It was testimony which contradicted the official version of events, that Foster had shot himself in the mouth, right? And the issue that came up for Ambrose Evans Pritchard and for one key witness was the fact that there was a claim that he'd shot himself in the mouth as a suicide, and what they were saying was, no, it wasn't in the mouth, it was in the side of the neck. Now, let me just come down to the witness statement here now. He saw, says Ambrose Evans Pritchard, a photo a photo which showed a black stippled ring like a gunshot wound in the side of Foster's neck. This remains secret, but I have seen it. The photo was pivotal. It confirmed what several people who handled the body had originally stated. I interviewed the first rescue worker on the scene, and when I asked him about the mouth wound, he grabbed me and said with frightening intensity, "Listen to me, buddy. Foster was shot right here," jabbing his finger into my neck. He said the FBI had pressured him into changing his story and that the official narrative was a pack of lies. Now, Kavanaugh's reaction, and he was, privy to this information because of his position in the Star Inquiry. Kavanagh's reaction to the findings of his colleagues, not quite right, he wasn't a colleague, that was a separate line of inquiry, which Kavanaugh wasn't connected with, right? And Ambrose Evans Pritchard admits that he can't tie Kavanaugh to anything of malfeasance, right? But Kavanagh's reaction can be found in the stash of released documents from the Star Inquiry. One says in Kavanaugh's own handwritten note, startling discovery, quote, blew up portions of photo, trauma to the neck on RT side, quote, appears to be bullet hole, close quote. He was presented with a long analysis that ripped apart the earlier report and called for an open homicide investigation. That had huge implications for the Clinton presidency and caused an internal crisis in the Star in the Star office. So he says Kavanaugh had a choice. He chose to go with the establishment rather than stick with the truth. And Kavanaugh went on to write the Star report on the Foster death. So there you go. And perhaps that's an issue about Kavanaugh that you should be concerning yourself about if you're interested in digging into the past of Kavanaugh and trying to uncover the truth. And I wouldn't overstate what he's saying there, except to broadly agree that perhaps individuals who have shown that they can be trusted not to be too totally 100% committed to the truth, so to speak, are exactly the kind of individuals who make their way into the right positions and make their way onto the Supreme Court. You can't have all the truth coming out after all, can you? So where does that leave us at the end of all that? Well, I love this cartoon. We sure got Kavanaugh, says the media and the Dems, standing there covered in shit. Yeah, you got him all right, at unbelievable cost. This failure of the witch hunt mentality, this failure of the kind of the breed of aggressive feminism which has been deliberately cultivated by the CIA, because the CIA took over feminism early on and began to direct it to its own ends. Establishments have been thwarting and twisting the momentum of the feminist movement. So, do women deserve to be free from sexual abuse? Absolutely. Do women deserve to be listened to carefully and intently when they make charges that such assaults have taken place? Absolutely. Is that an excuse to use that kind of dynamic and our sympathy for a victim to go on a political witch hunt in order to get power back from the guy who, to my knowledge, is the only person who's ever arrested 9/11 conspirators, and that's Donald Trump, trying to get at him through Kavanaugh and trying to fire up the Democratic base. So I'll say that again, and you can link to the audio and video presentation on the 9/11 issue, but Donald Trump and Jared Kushner has been connected with the arrest of 9/11 linked figures in Saudi Arabia. The story of that and their interactions with the Saudi regime, the new Saudi regime, are in that other video. So failure is where this is all ended in, for this plot to steamroll and to trample and to overcome by sheer hysteria the nomination of Kavanaugh, and thereby inflict tremendous damage, and even on the Republicans, and even if you don't inflict tremendous damage, at the very minimum the aim and objective was to fire up the Democratic base. But a lot of people who are not absolutely invested in this thing have looked at it and have asked themselves if it's really what it was purported to be by those making the allegations. See, Harvey Weinstein, he looks like a potential sex abuser, and indeed he is, from all reliable and multiple evidence over a long career. Kavanaugh never really fit that. This never really came up to the levels required, and it was a terrible miscalculation, a fortunate miscalculation for those of us who'd like to see the truth and 9/11's truth come out. What else during during the week that you should be up to speed on? Yeah, I got it before leaving this. Got to definitely bring to your attention an article, and as I say, I'll link to all this. This is one from back in June of this year, about the cookies on this site, except the ACLU is getting involved in elections and reinventing itself for the Trump era. And there's also another one that you should take a look at. If you, like me, remember when the ACLU used to be the ACLU, and ACLU's opposition to Kavanaugh sounds its death knell. Did you see that? Where the ACLU ran attack ads against Kavanaugh, one in particular which featured Bill Cosby, Bill Clinton, making denials on sexual issues, and then showed you a little clip of Kavanaugh denying, saying by implication, simply by associating him in the video with two known sex predators, that by implication he was in good company. The ACLU put the video out. The Civil Liberties Group put an attack video out using smear tactics against Kavanaugh. How did the ACLU ever end up like that? Well, you can read this other one that's from Alan Dershowitz, who says, this ain't the ACLU you guys used to know. Back in the good old days, he writes about the ACLU having cash reserves of, or a budget in the order of, 60 million? I can't remember. But he says they currently have assets of 450 million. $500 million, the ACLU. They have been taken over by the money which has come in since Trump came. And the ACLU is now being used as a vehicle. What else? We'll move quickly along. Yes, the story of the S-300 missile defense system being delivered in Syria by Putin. Look, there it is, the second most powerful missile defense system on the planet, the S-300. And there it is. This is the big plane arriving from Russia in Syria, and here's the missile defense system rolling off. Why? Because 15, wasn't it, Russian military service members were killed when a Russian plane was shot down recently, because the Israelis have been playing silly games, hundreds of missions, attacking left, right and centre all over Syria, and finally that ended in the loss of life we're talking about. Putin didn't say very much, kept very quiet, and instead he acted. And here you see the action. That's the end of that. I don't think that Israeli fighters will be flying around Syria with the same aplomb as they did before these missile defense systems arrived. Speaking of missile defense systems, another related story is that also in the last few days, India have signed a $5.5 billion arms deal with Russia. And what are they getting? They're not getting the S-300 like Syria got. They're getting the latest. They're getting the S-400, which is the best missile defense system on the planet. And that's an interesting development, isn't it? So, Russian military weaponry development is high quality, highly advanced, and because it isn't layered down with massive corruption, it's far more efficient and effective. It's quite possible these S-400 units will eventually be the main line of defence for a whole host of countries, which will no longer be susceptible to impromptu and unapproved attack by the United States. So some stories there. I'll leave it at that and come back to some more stories in future events. But one other one I did want to get to was this one here, this story from The Onion. Pope blames devil for church divisions, scandals, seeks angels' help. Of course, it's not from The Onion, it's from Reuters. It's not a joke story, it's a real story. More bad news for the New World Order, boys. The devil's alive and well and working overtime to undermine the Roman Catholic Church, says Pope Francis. He's convinced that Satan is to blame for the sexual abuse crisis and the deep divisions racking the Church. And so he's asked Catholics around the world to recite a special prayer every day in October to beat that devil back. The Church must be saved from the attacks of the malign one. Those are the trucks going by outside. The great accuser, and at the same time be made more aware of its guilt, its mistakes and abuses committed in the past and present. Francis has been talking about the accuser, but this isn't the first time. The first mention of the accuser was talking about Vigano, the whistleblowing cardinal, who blew the whistle on the fact that Francis has been promoting sex predators who are politically convenient for Francis's agenda. Now, Francis was parachuted into the Catholic Church as a New World Order gambit in order to move the Church into a sort of touchy-feely direction where they don't talk about abortion so much, and instead they concentrate on nice democratic talking points like global warming and immigration. Globalist talking points. I don't think that's what the Church is supposed to be. And here we are, just a couple of years down the road, and the guy is already so devoid of credibility that he's now having to resort to definitely scraping the bottom of the barrel when you start saying, they're all out to get me and the devil's behind it all. He said that he called on the Archangel, Michael the Archangel, to help him thrust into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Well, Francis, those who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls are the sex predators, the ones that you've promoted. So maybe you should be less worried about the imps in the sky and a little bit more worried about the sex predators around you, the devils right around you, dude. All around, really, it's bad news for the New World Order. And November is going to be interesting, one way or another. As soon as the gloves are on, believe it or not, the stuff that's been going on, that's the fighting with the gloves on. The gloves come off after November, and they certainly come off on the side of Trump. And a lot of chickens are going to come home to roost. The reason for the hysteria almost on the side of the Clinton apparatus, the Democratic neoliberal apparatus, is that they've got to keep the hysteria going. It only works as long as they can keep everybody hysterical, which they've been trying to do since the moment that Trump came to power, yeah? Because if ever people get a chance to sit back and think, then they might start asking themselves questions about, like, why aren't we getting rid of the Clintons and building a new Democratic Party? Why aren't we dealing with real economic issues? Why aren't we coming up with something else other than sex allegations, for crying out loud? You see? So there's the potentially damaging content that once the fizz goes out of the lynch mob, then maybe it actually is hard to reignite that. And if so, they're in deep trouble. And as I say, regardless, even you can expect them to go on the attack when they take control of the House. And you can expect Trump to simultaneously go on the attack, and you can expect the Mueller thing to come out, and you can expect deep state operatives to be outed in great detail. So all of that's ahead of us. Anyway, big changes here, as you know, and Cathy McMahon was with BreakForNews from the beginning and from 9/11, the seed event which has led us all to these events here today, and as I say, to the most important political developments since the election of Trump in this battle to see if we can wrest back control of democracy from the intelligence agencies and the others in the background who have been bending it to their own ends. So Kathy with us for all of that, and now here we are at what I see now is the end of the New World Order going to play out. It's going to be an interesting and quite a dynamic 6 or 9 months ahead. We'll see. Okay, I'll be back with more on that, I'm sure. So that's about it for this. It's great to be back on air. It's great to be here with you. I'll be back with more very soon, and I hope you can join me for that. In the meantime, this has been Fintan Dunne.